Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. Welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. We're thrilled to be hosting it today. Members of CSO UK, it's an organization based here in the UK that focuses on thought leadership for the most senior leaders in sales, which I know many of you are. We're thrilled that you could join us today. My name is Tamara McMillen. I act as an advisor to CSO UK and I'm involved with the steering committee. I would like to ask my fellow participants on the panel today to introduce themselves. Dave, we'll start with you. Dave on the beach. Chris, do you want to
go? I can jump in whilst Dave seems to have paused there for a moment. So yeah, I'm Chris Duddridge. I'm the Area Vice President and Managing Director of UiPath, which is an automation RPA company based in London, although currently based at home down on the south coast near Brighton. Yeah, delighted to be part of the CSO steering committee, but also participate in this call today. I think the topics are fantastic.
Thank you. And we do happen to have Josh, the CEO of CSO UK on. Would you do us the pleasure of a brief introduction, Josh, and add anything else about the organization that you'd like?
Yeah, would love to. So yeah, I'm Josh Smith, the CEO of CSO UK. I think that we're really privileged to have built up a senior revenue leadership community over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, obviously with the help of Tamara, Chris, Dave, and a few others. And yeah, I think overall we've just been really, really fortunate. We've got a great group of people who come together to share ideas, to help each other, especially through times like now, where there is a lot of uncertainty, and having that trusted network of people where you can get valuable advice from. I think that, now there's never probably been a more important time to have a group like CSO UK.
I definitely agree. And we've had the opportunity to have some of those wonderful conversations prior to today. And we hope that you will look into CSO UK if you want to find out a bit more about our content. Before we get started, I want to talk about a couple housekeeping rules. We want this to be interactive, so please do use the Q&A, and if you have questions, pop them in there. I'm really interested to know also where you're joining us from, so if you want to pop in chat and let us know where we can enjoy knowing our listeners or our followers are at today, that would also be great. You will get a copy, a link sent to you within 24 hours of today's event, so you don't have to be mad at taking notes. If you find the things we're saying interesting or noteworthy, you will get a copy so you can go back and listen to anything of particular interest. So we've got folks from LA, Florida, Dubai, fantastic, all over from the States, and certainly from here in the UK. And during this time, we really wish you all well. We hope your families are well. We know that this has been an incredibly difficult time, an unprecedented time. I don't think there's any adjective I could use to describe this time that you've not already heard. Our world leaders are trying to figure out how to manage, and I'm sure we all have compliments and criticisms to hand out for each and every one of them. But like them, we as leaders are also trying to manage and lead in this current crisis and trying to figure out how to do that effectively so that we keep people motivated, we keep our businesses hopefully moving forward or sustaining, or perhaps in some situations trying to literally survive. And for each and every employee of our business, they feel that very real as well. What we hope to talk about today on the panel are some aspects of what we've been experiencing in that leadership. At CSO UK, one of the things we like to do is be quite transparent and real. At the end of the day, each of us are real human beings with families and obligations, experiences that we can each benefit from. So I hope that you experience this conversation as something that's very authentic, and we hope that when you contribute to the conversation, you will do the same. This is a safe place for us to grow together and share together. So I'd like to start by asking perhaps a question that seems like it has an obvious answer, but how well prepared were we for what we're experiencing with COVID-19? And when I say that, there's a level at which we know that no one was prepared, but as it relates to our business, we've all seen a huge shift towards remote working, obviously a mandatory requirement that we work from home. I'd love to hear from both Dave and Chris. How well prepared were your businesses? Were you set up? Did you have the tools the processes, almost the remote leadership. Tell us some stories about what you've been experiencing, and we'd love to hear the good and a bit about perhaps the challenging and the bad. I'm not sure who'd like to take that first.
Well, I'll take it first, Tamara, and thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. Hope you all understand our English accents. Yeah, I guess, were we prepared? Not really, same as everybody else. We'd thought about it for the week before we went onto lockdown. We'd got tools in place. We were already using Zoom. Didn't have any shares in Zoom, which I wish I had. Obviously, a lot of our back office, like most people, is built on Salesforce. We did have to do some work on security to make sure everybody working from home was going to be secure for us. Not least the fact that Proda operates mainly in the commercial real estate and therefore the financial services space. So that was really important to our clients, not just to us. We scrambled a bit. I mean, we had to figure out, not everybody in the company had laptops. A lot of people had desktops, particularly dev guys and some of our analyst groups. So we had to work with that. But we were, like everybody, we just weren't ready, but we only had a week or two's notice, really. We all thought that what was happening in Italy and France wouldn't happen to us because we're British. And that's how we deal with things. We kind of just wait until they're on top of us. But we're coping. It's just been a challenging few weeks, and I'm sure we'll get into that as we move forward. I just want to say, though, by the way, I'm not actually on the beach. I just thought it would cheer me up for the holidays I'm not likely to have this year. So,
but I think if you were on the beach in the UK, well, not the palm tree, but the wind would certainly be familiar, right? And the cold, right? Chris, what about you? You work in a technology business who helps others automate, and so were you perhaps more prepared than some? Was it an easy adjustment for your organization to make?
I think it's definitely fair to say we were very well equipped in the fact that remote working is not something that's uncommon to us. We when we started as a business, we hired very intentionally regionally across the UK and Ireland, and so a lot of our people have been working remotely for some time. Those that were in the office, some of our inside sales colleagues, some of the individuals that were part of the office management or just like to be in the office every day. There was maybe a slight adjustment to working from home. There was a few days of seeing people working from ironing boards rather than desks, and we were scrabbling around to make sure they had the equipment that they needed to work at home. I think the biggest thing we possibly sort of didn't encounter is those of us with the young ones that are around. That was the biggest adjustment, trying to shut our children out of calls and try and still pretend that they didn't exist. But actually, one of the things that I think has become the most encouraging recently is actually that people are now comfortable with the fact that we're all at home. Most of us have families and other members around that might be making a bit of background noise as we're trying to communicate. So actually, they're normally welcomed onto the call. So just to be introduced to who it might be that I'm talking to that day. We didn't have any security challenges. To be honest, it was really just ordering a few keyboards and a few mouses for certain individuals. So I think we possibly felt a little bit smug when it came to our own technical setup. But actually, what I would say was the biggest challenge was the customer piece, because we support customers from quite literally every single industry vertical across the globe. And some of those are seeing unprecedented challenges to deliver their revenues, which from anything in sort of facilities management, as sort of David alluded to, commercial real estate, there's a real challenge that those organisations face. Our airline customers, our customers that deal in sort of hotels or really transportation, logistics, or anything that's part of that supply chain, were completely disrupted. And of course, that's a challenge which meant we had to think differently about how we connected to those customers, how we supported them, how we made sure that they weren't left behind. And I think that those are the challenges that still persist, because this isn't going anywhere for a short while anyway. And whilst the initial reaction was to kind of deal with the COVID challenge and be well set up to support people, we now have to sustain that, and we actually have to find really innovative ways of connecting with our customers and making sure that our content are our ways in which we're interacting with them still inside the premises of our normal business operations are authentic, and they're not disrupted by poor internet connections, which I think has just come up now for once. It really is the challenges around making sure our customers are front and center that's the bit that's taken the most adjustment.
And we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the customers. So I think that's really, really important. A lot of the thinking has been around how do we manage our employees, but our customers are incredibly impacted as well. Sticking with kind of remote working and employees and how ready we were. In the US, I think it's fair to say remote working is quite common, and companies are probably slightly more prepared than in some other markets. But that being said, I think leading a remote workforce is still, it probably has been a bit of a challenge, but I think that's something in particular. How do you make sure that people are being productive? How do you adjust your expectations, considering that customers are not buying in the same way? Have either of you experienced that at all in terms of adjusting your leadership style or trying to figure out how you manage employees remotely, whether it's motivating them or keeping them accountable, or trying to find ways that they can still be productive if they're producing differently than they were in the past?
Yeah, I think that has been difficult for a lot of people. I mean, the first point is salespeople by their very nature are quite often extrovert and enjoy social contacts, and I'm one of those. And I think that's been a big challenge for everybody. I haven't found either with my guys or with other people I've spoken to, other leaders I've spoken to in the industry, that productivity has necessarily been a big issue. The issue, some of it has been mental. We all, I think, appreciate we've got to be very conscious of the mental health impact of this crisis, because people are living in isolated environments. Not everybody's got a family that they live with, so some people are living alone, quite a lot actually. So lack of social contact's been tough, but I think keeping the morale high, it's getting a little easier as people are adjusting. It was very difficult in the first 2 or 3 weeks, particularly while people were getting organized, our customers were getting organized with the new way of working. And literally, we saw traction drop off to virtually nothing. That's coming back now. We saw it last week, which was week 4 for us. We saw it coming back, but for any salesperson that's in an environment where they're getting zero traction is really uncomfortable for them. And they start to get fear about job security, fear about sales performance, fear about commissions, because obviously if you're not selling, you're not earning money. And salespeople are very good at living at the edge of their earning capacity. And that's been a real challenge. And I think, from my perspective, the way I've approached this is just to over communicate. I'm trying to be very positive, but very realistic. Nobody wants to hear it's all going to be wonderful. Yeah. I believe people want to hear we're going to get out of this. We're going to be okay. We're going to do well, but it might take us a little while. And here's the reasons behind it. So if I look again, I can only really talk about my own industry, but we're a software company that sells into the commercial real estate market. One of the most badly affected markets right now. If you look at those markets that have been most badly hit, as Chris touched on, airlines, hospitality, but also real estate, because one of the things that I'm absolutely 100% sure of is the world will never be the same again. I'm not saying it'll be bad. In fact, I think there'll be some really good things come out of this, but things will change. So look at in our space, the impact of, or the success of home working will mean people don't need as much office space. The retail sector has been, I think, in some cases damaged beyond belief, and probably for some companies damaged beyond recovery, which is really sad. That's going to change the makeup of our market. So, and every market you talk to, every salesperson that's listening to this today, from Washington to Orlando to LA. I noticed we had somebody on from Dubai. We've got somebody on from Georgia in Eastern Europe. Everyone's got something in their market that's going to change.
Yeah, that's true.
This is going to be a big step. This is a big change for people. And even people that are running their own businesses, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit tomorrow, but You know, for early stage businesses, this is horrendous. You're managing cash flow in a completely different way. You're
Yeah,
managing
the
your
speed
planning
market
process
will be incredibly, incredibly impacted. And I think, you know, there are those lead horses that have been in the race, and you have small businesses trying to come alongside, and they may have been making progress, but this will be the time, and many of them actually fail to exist because they just can't make the curve. Chris, were you going to add something there? I'm not sure if you were trying to come in.
I was going to pick up on, I think, probably the most pertinent point that David made, of all of his really pertinent points, obviously. But actually, it was around the communication and the communication style. I think that is really key. You know, I have quite a large team across the UK and Ireland, but in fact, we have quite a large business globally. And actually, the communication is unique to each an individual team and each an individual function within the business. But within my role, that essentially has directs and dotted lines across everyone that works within the territory, we've had to find ways of making sure that everyone has that kind of that sort of mental stability, really, to understand that whilst they might be socially isolated, that they do have, you know, people around them. So we've kind of implemented things we would have never done before. So like daily stand-ups that are via Zoom, that are optional, but actually we see a very large proportion of the business connect to. And they're not, they may have started a little bit noddy in the fact that, you know, it was a lot of people asking, are you okay? How are you adjusting? Would you like a mouse? Have you got a keyboard? Have you got a comfy chair? Actually, to thinking about really interesting challenges we can overcome as a team, you know, some that we may never have worked on together to resolve. And I suppose we're very fortunate we get to work on some really exciting stuff, you know, some of it pro bono, but some of it that actually is because, you know, digital transformation at this day and age is now even more present because of the lack of physical workers in many businesses. But actually we've helped resolve, you know, really amazing things within hospitals and within you know, within the delivery of, you know, personal protective equipment as a business. But we've not done that individually. We've done that as a team. We've discussed it openly. We've come up with ideas, and actually that for me was quite interesting, because, you know, we often actually found ourselves working in silos on projects, and because we were overly communicating and giving everyone a voice, actually I think that's changed our business for the better for the long term.
It's really,
you know,
helped with collaboration, it sounds like.
Absolutely, and I think collaboration for me is key to the success of anything you set off to achieve. You can't do it alone, as we all know. But actually, the way in which those daily check-ins, although they have gone to twice or three times a week now, and actually they're run across EMEA as well by my boss. They're just brilliant, because actually it gives people some ideas. And actually, just to try and make sure we level set here, we're not talking about COVID a lot of the time. We're talking about post-COVID. We're talking about how we can help our own business and help our clients recover when we're finally allowed to go out into the big wide world again and interact in the way that we're all desperate to. Because again, to David's point about, you know, salespeople that are sort of facing challenges by this isolation, I'd agree. You know, I most certainly want to see another human being in a meeting room again at some point very soon.
We have a couple of questions that I want to add
to that, Tamara. I think Chris makes a great point. You know, I've found that I'm collaborating more than I've ever collaborated with my team, and not just with my team. I mean, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer, so my primary function is sales and marketing, but I'm collaborating with the analyst teams. I'm collaborating with the dev teams. We're collaborating much better as a senior leadership team because we have to. And the salespeople, the marketing teams, I'm getting them involved in every core decision. So instead of my marketing team making a decision about the next campaign in isolation, which they often will, and then we'll discuss it, is let's get everybody together. Because
we've talked a lot at CSO about sales and marketing alignment, and how it's almost a bad joke in business. Like, we all know we need to do it, and somehow after decades and decades of talking about it, we're still not doing it. It sounds like what you're saying is, in certainly your circumstance, and perhaps in others, Chris, as well, that there is greater collaboration. Perhaps there is more alignment because we have to be a little bit more thoughtful. We're having to get more creative. we're having to be quite sensitive. There'll be certain types of customers that we probably shouldn't be targeting right now because of some of those industries really negatively hit. They need to be focusing on other things, but there might be certain industries or verticals or market segments that really could use that engagement from us, and we need to focus our efforts there. We've had a couple questions come in, and some of them are pertinent to the great points you've been making, so I just want to make sure that we cover those off. One was when we talked about leading remote workers. We often have corporate messages, global messages. Chris, you talked a little bit about the need to make sure that those messages become a bit more personal, that things can work different in different teams. Where have we seen leaders rise up within our teams or within our organizations, informally just taking a leadership role? And what are some of the fun ways that you've built some morale and community in what is a very difficult time? And for some people, home isn't a great place. Sometimes home is hard. And so what are the kinds of things that you have perhaps instituted that have helped with the mental health, that have brought more of that culture together, and maybe where there's some leadership that you've seen come forward that didn't come from the formal leaders, but from the rank and file, to use that expression?
Yeah, I think just to answer that in reverse order, the most important thing to remember is your situation is most certainly not somebody else's situation. And actually, I had to check myself, because I had to think, when I was actually thinking about some of my friends' circumstances where they're living in a flat that doesn't have a balcony, that literally is meaning they're spending morning, noon and night in a flat and don't really have the facilities or means to get out, take a stroll whenever they want to. Now, you can count yourself lucky, but you can also channel that into making sure that you look at the way other people might be experiencing this crisis, because it's going to be very different to yours, I can assure you. For me, that's meant that what we've implemented by necessity, but also because I think it's really important, is a buddy system. So it might sound a bit cliche and a bit cheesy, but actually everyone needs a buddy, someone to check in on them, and they can be both from a kind of a sort of a well-purposed check-in just to see how people are doing, but it can also be helping people achieve goals. So set yourself a challenging goal for the day and check in by the end of the day to see if you achieved it. That's worked really well for us, but I think that's just to make sure for those that are maybe not in as fortunate circumstances as some, that everyone is left, everyone's accounted for. And then I think to your other point around sort of people standing up and being leaders, I think this crisis is actually showing people's leadership potential, especially within our organisation, because there's a mindset thing, and there's either we've seen many stories and articles about a growth mindset and how a positive mindset can actually affect the way you approach business and the way you approach your daily challenges or roles and responsibility. But I think those that have just got on with it and understood that obviously that we have to still continue, we have to still service our customers, we have to still think about each other as best we can, and support each other. You see that much more apparently when you're not physically connected to people. I've seen some amazing initiatives come from actually some of the more junior members of staff. We're a very partner-centric organisation, so actually we have an even larger extended sales force than, in fact, the people that the 40 sellers that work for the UK and Ireland. We have teams of GSIs, teams of regional partners, teams of local sort of bespoke boutique partners, all of whom have got 2, 10, 200, 2,000 staff that are reselling our capabilities. Actually, they are part of our community as well, and so actually that sort of mentality shouldn't just extend to your immediate direct reports and sales force. Some of the initiatives to just put their arm around some of the smaller partners that are going to be even more cash constrained and collection focused than, as David alluded to, they need some external support. We are the big boys or girls in their eyes. We're the organisation that should be supporting our supply chain essentially as best we can. And actually, if you think about that across every industry sector, whether it is your suppliers, that are now constrained by the amount that you're producing or that you're actually being able to ship, we need to have a thought for them as well. So my biggest view is that actually anyone within the organisation of any level within the hierarchy that can come up with innovative ways of making sure that we don't leave a single person behind. That for me is leadership. That for me is something that I hope remains beyond this challenge.
That's a really good point. And communication, we've touched on that a bit, and how it's really important. Dave, you talked about communicating, regularly with your team. And I think it can be difficult in a time like this to be human, transparent, realistic. It is tough for everyone in a variety of different ways, harder for some than others, but also to still be optimistic, to be future thinking, to contemplate how we're going to come out the other side, and be stronger, hopefully, than we were. How are we going to keep going? We have a great question come in from Taryn, who is asking, they have a company called 10 Times, and they work in international markets, and they do event marketing. So their revenues have gone down substantially. And I think this is a really fair question that I don't know if any of us can actually answer, but we'd love to help. But it's, how can I save the good jobs of the great talent that I have, and how do I use them effectively in the meantime to generate good ROI? I don't know if either of you have any words of wisdom you can share. There are ideas that you've seen work in situations like that, and I'm sure it's quite difficult.
Yeah, I can certainly make a comment. I mean, firstly, I'm really sorry to hear that, but I know event hospitality has really struggled through this. In fact, the whole hospitality industry. How do you protect jobs? That's tough, because ultimately companies are going to start cutting costs. They've got to manage their cash flow. Now in the UK, fortunately, we've been really lucky in the UK, I think, in that the government have put a scheme in for furloughing staff where you can lay people off for the duration of the crisis, and the government will pay 80% of their salary. And I know a number of organisations that have done that. They've done that effectively. In fact, some of the world's largest organisations have done that. If you're a smaller business, if you've got that ability, then I would absolutely recommend to take it, because the one thing I'm sure about is business will come back. We were joking before the call when we were just prepping for this, that kind of I'm the dinosaur of the group, and I've lived through 3 of these now, not the same as this virus, but 3 major recessions in the market. And it's amazing how fast things bounce back. Everybody's seen the effect on the public markets, on the FTSE and on the Dow and Nikkei. They drop so fast, they'll come back. That is life. It's cyclical. This is harder because it's a global pandemic. And, I think the one thing, not wanting to get political, but the one thing we're not being told is we're not going back to normal until there's a vaccine. Things will not be completely normal until we're able to vaccinate against this thing. Because this is an evil, nasty thing. But I think, trying to focus it back on the question, but how do you protect jobs? I honestly don't have an answer for that. I don't know your business. I can tell you what we've done. And what we've done is keep people productive and take a leadership decision. There's kind of 3 of us that run the business. And we've taken a leadership decision that we are going to do everything in our power to make sure our team is protected to the maximum. And we will carry them as far as we can. And we believe we'll be okay. And we'll come through the other side. But I think it is a leadership decision that says, okay, we're going to protect our teams. I think one of the things that's come out of this, and I've seen it in the UK, and I've seen it reading the world's press, is we've seen the best and the worst of human behaviour, and we've seen the best and the worst of business behaviour in the last 4 weeks. We've seen businesses like Marks and Spencer's, like Macy's in the US, take this incredible stance of saying, we are not laying anybody off. And that's a fantastic thing to do because they're protecting their family. We've also seen businesses that have taken a different approach. And, as we talked about, or I've talked about to several people, at the end of this, people will have long memories. And those employers, and I'd like to think we're one, and I know talking to Chris that UiPath are thinking the same way. Our staff, our team, our business family will remember us if we do the right things by them.
Yeah.
And we'll see the benefit in the long term.
to that, you did say a few things that could potentially be helpful. One is, do you have the opportunity to ask everyone to share in the pain? So, can they all take a collective reduction, which is tough because they're already missing out on a bunch of money, but is there any way to do that? I have seen some businesses convert their employees to you pay for performance, so we're on a contract basis. So you can say you can still work here, but we only pay you as you come. So instead of laying you off, we give you an opportunity to work with us on a contract basis. That may help, but I think to the point you made, Dave, it's really difficult to keep people when you don't have revenue. And while we're fortunate that there are schemes in place in the UK, and I'm sure in other countries, I talk with a lot of leaders who are also saying, is it just a temporary Band-Aid? Because when those protections come off, as we move into 2021, budgets are going to look different. So we're going to have to start getting more creative. So maybe we can expand job titles. Maybe we can find new markets. But I think people will, unfortunately, we just won't all have jobs.
Sadly,
for a little while.
No, you're right. I mean, I think every major economy, every minor economy, smaller economy, is going to take a hit on unemployment, and it's a really sad thing to have to say.
Yeah.
True. The economy of the world. It's not the economy of the UK. It's not the economy of the US. It's not the economy of Dubai. The economy of the world is being affected, and at the end of it, and this comes through. I was talking earlier about when you're trying to give a message to your teams: be positive, but be honest and be realistic. The fact is, we've told our team we're going to do everything we can to protect it. There may come a time that's just not possible.
Yeah.
But we are unfortunately going to see unemployment, and things will have to change. And then it's up to us as leaders, it's up to governments as leaders to build the economy back up so we can get that unemployment down again. Because we will be able to express it that long.
So there's a related question. It comes from Santiago Correa, who's calling from or joining us from Colombia. Thank you so much. A really great question. And it has to do with our customers. How do you prospect in a time like this? And I think one reality is they're just all saying no. They've got other priorities. At the same time, there are still things being bought and sold. What advice, Chris, might you be able to give to how a business can continue to prospect whilst being sensitive in this time? And
empathy is possibly the key thing. We I can talk anecdotally about other industry sectors. Again, David and I both come from the world of software technology. But we're unlike, we are like any other organization. We have customers who are profiteering and seeing, I say profiteering is the wrong word, who are seeing an upturn based on this crisis, especially hair clipper sales is going through the roof. And we're seeing others that are really struggling. But these businesses want to sustain. They want to continue to operate beyond this crisis. So a lot of them are restructuring. It does link to the previous point around headcount and the way in which the business can survive. But ultimately, if you have a product to sell and you are actively selling, your entire approach has changed. Be it through supply channel, be it through partner channel, be it through direct sales, your tone of voice, the way in which you address your peers within another organization has changed quite dramatically, because at the end of it, the hard sell is possibly still to have a level of empathy applied to it, which means that understanding that no is okay, is actually probably the best thing that you can hope for if people are going to be sort of looking to give you commitment or not. But the reality for me is, organizations who might still want to acquire your capabilities, your products or your services, they may be asking for things to be considered that might be slightly different than they would normally. Extended payment terms, or actually if they're subscribing to something, they might be looking for payment holidays to help sustain them using the technology or using your service, but still having a little bit of a gift that you may have the opportunity to give. I think every case is different. You know, we can't say that, you know, as a business we could survive by providing a payment holiday to every single organisation. You know, some of the banks that are offering, you know, personal loans and mortgages that have given payment holidays, that's just a delay ultimately in you paying that loan. It actually adds the the ultimate cost to that at the end of the term anyhow. But I think everyone has to understand that the people are going to be buying in different ways. People are going to be looking to you to try and offer an alternative to them to still acquire your capabilities, as I say, products or services. So I think you have to find your way around it. I think the leadership team also need to be managed up. Often the leadership team, you know, we can all be very guilty of saying, so you're committing to delivering a number, thanks, let me know when that's done. Actually, there's often a way where you have to empower the people that work within your business to feel confident enough that they can come to you and raise challenges that mean that actually won't be a commitment that they can deliver, but actually it might be a commitment that might be deferred if we could do something differently to service that client's particular needs. David made a fabulous point earlier on around memory and people having a long memory for this process. The way in which you treat your staff and the way in which you treat your customers at this point in time matters for the long term, because if you do sustain, you do manage to retain the business beyond it, then those organizations you've helped sustain through that period as well, I think will be even more loyal, and they will show a greater return from your empathy, albeit it might challenge you as an organization from a cash flow and top line perspective in the short term. But I think empathy is
one of the
the key word.
Yeah, I worked for MCI when WorldCom went bankrupt, and just to that point, it was a really terrifying time for all of our customers. They didn't understand if we were going to be able to provide service. Obviously, they didn't understand how stable we would be as a company. But one of the hallmarks of that time was that we didn't lose a single global customer. Some of them diversified a little bit, but the reason we were able to keep them is exactly what you described, I think there, Chris, is it was around how you treated them, how you empathized with the situation, how you understood they did need to protect their business, but that we had strong partnerships throughout, and if they could continue to trust us, that we would continue to deliver, and just trying to do those things well. And I think for those who are concerned about having to lay off salespeople or losing customers, I think churn is one way that we can, really try and protect our organization. It's very important to at least keep the customers you have right now, because getting new ones has become exponentially harder. So I guess that could be an encouragement to everyone. We have another question, Jamie from Denver, Colorado. They said that they have a new office that opened up in Australia, 3 new SDRs. There's only a short overlap of good business hours, and they use the tools that we're familiar with, like Zoom and Slack, but still find it tough perhaps to stay in touch with those satellite offices. Are there any suggestions that we can offer to perhaps help? And I imagine right now that that's complicated further by the crisis. Any ideas or tools that you use beyond those two to stay connected?
Yeah, I think I saw some comments coming in about UK internet today. It's definitely having a challenging time from wherever we all are, it seems. I think some of the tools that we use to stay connected, I mean, we've piloted all sorts of different things at the moment, and we want to avoid them being a bit of a fad or a bit of a, we actually have to gauge that they're going to be used. We've seen some tools that give you a virtual office, so you can actually kind of move around those and have the opportunity to kind of dive in and have active conversations as if you'd bumped into somebody in the hallway. Again, a little bit, we trialed it, it didn't get used ultimately. So I think, we returned back to having the daily Zooms and actually we even put a live active Zoom on all day. So if anyone just wanted to drop in and drop out, that they could use that. Again, the numbers of people that used it were quite low, but the numbers were high when you set a purposeful all hands, and the frequency of those has just been going through the roof, and that's from our exec, from our EMEA leadership, and from myself to the UKI team. I think, communicate. There's no over communication at the moment. I think that's key. I haven't seen any other innovative tools that we've really brought into yet to staying connected. Zoom is just actually a bit of a godsend, really.
Yeah, I think
We've lost
some of
David. We've lost David again, by the way. We've lost David as
yeah.
well, but again, so it's just crazy.
There's also been some creative things, which I think you make a fair point. Some of them might be anecdotal and some of them might be temporary, but we've heard of businesses where they would, they have virtual lunch together. You know, I think when you operate in different time zones, it's important that you do trade-offs in terms of the sacrifices. And, you know, I'll be honest, one of the challenges working in Europe, and I'm sure it's even worse in Asia, but things predominantly get scheduled in American time zones. And it's kind of expected that people, other places may adjust. And that can be difficult, particularly because sometimes we have transportation mechanisms that don't allow for that. So I would often have conference calls at 7 p.m., which doesn't really bother me. But it meant that I either had to stay in the office in London until 9 when the call was finished, or I had to leave the office at 4. Because I can't be on a train or in the tube and take a call. Whereas when I lived in California, I could be in my car, and that was meaningful. So I think sometimes it's some of the small things that you do that can help people feel more connected and engaged with you no matter where they are in the world. Be aware of what their holidays are. I had a call scheduled on Friday evening here. It's Good Friday, and here we take Good Friday and Monday off. Again, it's not that I might not be willing to do it, but sometimes just not being aware of the small things that are happening in the locations where people are living can feel like a disconnect. Thank you for coming back.
I think just on that point though, Tamara, I think the key thing to remember there is Zoom fatigue is real. You know, that the dissonance that you get from not being, it's very exhausting. And actually the key thing around this is you're spot on. If you try and, you know, keep to the sort of times you used to think about working. So for me, it was a 6:30 in the morning train into London if I was in town, which I was 3 days a week. You know, and I'd often get home at 8:30. In that day was probably 50% of it was just moving around, you know, from meeting to meeting on the tube or even just, you know, kind of walking down the road to get a coffee or a snack. There was probably a good half of the day that was still productive because it was thinking time, creating time, you know, time that you needed to get your brain. If you just bounce from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom and you allow yourself to do so, then we will all be facing a big burnout at the end of this crisis. I think that is a really key point about leadership, is making sure that we think to give people the time to feel empowered, to take a pause, to take a break, to not be strapped to the screen all day. It's really, really key. So it was a really good point there.
Yeah, I mean, I missed some of that because obviously my link dropped, so I apologise, but I'm back now.
Let me have you back.
Yeah, somebody commented on the... Sorry?
Did you want to add a comment before I move this on?
Chris in the bit I heard of that, Chris makes a really good point. It's and I've read a few things about this recently, and I talked a little bit about mental health earlier. Zoom's going to contribute to that if we don't make sure people are empowered to take breaks. If you think about our normal working days, we spend 10 minutes talking to a colleague over a coffee. We spend 20 minutes walking out to get a sandwich at lunchtime, just breaking, and you've got to be able to do that. And, you know, Chris talked earlier about empathy with your client and your customer, which is absolutely critical. Empathy with your staff, empathy with your teams. Make sure they understand that you know the pressures they're facing. You know that they need to take time out. They need to just go take a walk for 30 minutes. They need to go get some lunch. They need to just, you know, do whatever they need to do. Grab a coffee, talk to their wife, talk to their husband, play with the kids for 10 minutes. It's fine. Salespeople are much more productive when they have an environment they're comfortable in. And
you bring up a really good point, because I think also our teams are made up of different people. Some have children, some don't have children. We have children of different ages. You know, all kids are at home in the UK, and if they're small, they can't really do their schoolwork on their own. You know, so it's, and our internet, as you are all experiencing, is not necessarily great. So if all of a sudden you have a mom and a dad at home and kids are having to get on the computer, sometimes our ability to be productive for one reason or another can be very difficult. So how do we, as leaders, maybe arrange our days with some sensitivity to the fact that we may have people who have school-age children, and there may be certain times of the day that they just have to be a bit more hands-on because they're in the house, whereas other times of the day, maybe they're more productive hours. So those are really good points, and hopefully those are some useful things for others. when we're talking about sales, we talked about having to lay people off. Budgets have been redrafted several times and probably will be a few more times before the end of the year, but we're still in sales. We still have customers that we need to talk to. We have compensation plans, we have award schemes. How do we recognize the right things in this time? And, you know, are we adjusting targets as we adjust our budgets so that people can be successful with their revised numbers that are based on reality? Or are we having to hold them to where they are? I think a lot of people are curious how in sales we're managing compensation, recognition, and rewards in a time when it's going to be pretty tough. You know, in many industries, people just won't be able to make their numbers. And in the ones where they are, and in fact, some industries will blow the doors out. I'm sure Zoom salespeople, I know, Dave, we talked about that. A lot of them will be doing very well, but not necessarily as a direct result of their efforts. Do you give them the full benefit of that, or what do you do as a business there as well?
For me, this is one of the most challenging areas, and I'd love to hear what Chris has got to say as well. We're a relatively early stage business. I think we've rewritten our budgets probably every other day right now. You know, we're still trying to figure out what the world looks like on the other side of this thing, and nobody knows. I mean, yes, there are companies that are doing extraordinarily well. You mentioned Zoom. You know, if you're in the medical equipment business, you're probably doing well out of it. Not in a way that's profiteering, but because there's such increased demand for that solution. But I think in terms of targeting, moving forwards, you know, as leaders, we're going to have to accept the world has changed. As leaders, we have to accept that our sales team still need to earn money. Otherwise, we won't have a sales team because they'll leave. Salespeople, by their nature, are itinerant. And I therefore think that, and I'm going through this exercise right now, we have to think about restructuring compensation in line with revised budgets. Yeah. There may be an impact on cash flow, but that's a short-term impact, because next year or the second half of next year or the first half of the year after, you know, things will come back to where they were, or hopefully to where they were. And maybe we all have to take it, as leaders, we have to take a short-term hit. The fact is, right now, and I'm sure Chris in a lot of industries is finding the same thing, my solution in my market is not a priority for my customers today. Very specifically, my customer's priority is managing the level of risk that they've got in their portfolios. And one of the keys I've said to my sales team, the things I'd say to any salesperson listening to this, and any sales manager or sales leader listening to this, is one of the critical things for success moving forward is understand what your customer's current pressure is. Because I guarantee it is not the pressure it was 5 weeks ago. It isn't about revenue right now necessarily, because some industries just don't have any revenue. It may be about the model. It may be about how do I protect my staff. It may be about how do I manage my cash better. But it won't be the same priority as it was 5 weeks ago. So the key is understand what is the pressure on your customer. We're actually doing some work on our product, which will benefit us long term, and we were going to do it in the future anyway, moving it forward in the development cycle, because there are certain things that we would be able to do in our product that will benefit our customers today, and allow them to manage their risk better, for example. Yeah. And I would recommend that to anybody. Really sit and figure out where's your customer pressure and can you respond to it? Because actually the one thing all our customers need right now, and Chris alluded to this, is support.
Yeah. So, Chris, do you want to add in there as well?
I'll add a little bit there. I think that again, I can't talk for every industry sector, even though we do service every industry sector. And the truth is, you know, David's comment there is customer centricity overrides everything. Ultimately, I would, you know, take a little bit of a view from a sales leader's perspective that this is a challenge. You know, everyone faces challenges in their sales year, in their sales month or quarter or whatever measurement period they're getting, and depending, it's all very much for me around how quotas are set, and obviously how realistic they are and how set in stone they might be. Because to my mind, if you're, gold monthly or gold quarterly, then yes, the challenge right now, if your industry is destroyed in terms of buoyancy, it's going to be tough. But if you're on an annual plan and the business understands that it might be not the strongest Q1 and Q2 they've ever looked for, dependent on how your years might roll on, then I think it takes a bit of forward planning. Because for me, again, we are in a very fortunate position that this is a positive time for digital transformation. It's a necessary component to supporting. But actually, we've still got challenges, of course, in supporting some of those companies. But for any organisation that's going to climb out of this, and when it starts to get slightly back to normal, things will pick up again. And actually, you'll have seen what the priorities are, and you'll see the customers that need your support and service more than most. And actually, I think we need to think post-COVID. Everything that we do now needs to think about post-COVID recovery. And even if that comes down to your quotas, your attainment, your commissions, everything along those lines, that's equally probably where you should be thinking about how you should be building that pipeline and prospecting, beyond the immediate ask for someone to sign up to something they're not ready to right now. I think that would be my view.
That's a perfect segue. I know that we have just under 10 minutes to go. And I think we do want to end perhaps by talking about sort of post-COVID and some of the positives that are coming out of this. I'll just add on the recognition and reward. I would encourage you to think about ways that you can recognize the right behaviors that are happening, call them out, acknowledge them, because people may not be able to generate the results right now, but they may be doing some of the right behaviors. It is a great time to focus on learning and development. It is a great time to clean up Salesforce, which has always been a mess, and to kind of really get your house in order so that when the floodgates are reopened, you are able to move quite quickly. I think it's a time that we can take advantage of in that way. There's also some great things I think we can do around recognizing employees at home. I mean, the post may be slower, but it is still working. Sometimes it's put a handwritten card in the mail, send a box of chocolates to somebody who maybe closed a deal or made something happen. I think it's small, thoughtful gestures right now. You may not be able to support them to get the big paycheck that they're used to. And, maybe companies won't be able to do their annual President's Circle trips, who knows? But there are probably small things that can make people feel acknowledged, appreciated, and that they're doing the right things right now. And if they do that, then when the floodgates open, I think that those people will definitely be quite successful. They'll have enough shored up motivationally to keep going. So when we think about post-COVID, it's an excellent point, Chris, and I know you mentioned it earlier, and Dave, you've talked about it as well in terms of the memory, but I think we've learned a lot already. We're not out of this wood, but we're already learning. I think we've probably come up with potentially some best practices that we're going to keep, and probably tried some things that we'll be looking forward to leaving behind us. I'd love to hear quickly about that. And then my last question, if there's a comment, would be, I wonder if employees will be incredibly empowered after this. Many industries talked about digital transformation, talked about flexible working, but hadn't really embraced it. It's going to be harder, I think, for employers to now say, you can't work from home, or we're not going to do that, because we've sort of been doing it. So any closing thoughts on those things?
Yeah, if I can jump in first. I think you made 2 points that I would have made the same points. The first one is digital transformation. Everybody's been talking about this in the real estate business. We've been talking about it for 6 or 7 years, maybe longer. And yet still very few people have done it. That agenda, I think, across all industries, and Chris can comment as well, but that digital transformation agenda is going to get pushed right to the top. People have recognized, actually, we do need to rely on technology in a better way than we have been doing. We do need to make this business a truly digital business and be at the forefront. And there's a lot of talk in the press about that already. And I think certainly, as I say, in my space, that's been really accelerated. The second piece, you talk about home working. nobody can argue that doesn't work anymore. That argument's gone away. The one thing I would say is post-COVID, if I look at this in the context of post the recession in Europe in the 80s, post the dot-com crash in 2001, post the financial crisis in 2009, the mood during those crises was always the same. We can't sell anything. We can't survive. We'll never get through this.
Yeah.
We're all still here. And we're all still transacting, and markets recover to stronger positions than they were. Businesses become stronger as a result. It's the Darwinism. It's Charles Darwin's famous quote of, it's not the strongest of the species that survive. It's not the fittest of the species that survive. It's the ones that are most adaptable to change. We've had change forced on us. Embrace it, move forward, we'll be okay.
Excellent. Chris, any closing thoughts as we round out?
My perspective, I think David covered most of that really well. I think the thing around getting back to normality, I think we're going to all have to manage our T&E budgets pretty stringently for everyone clambering back to the office for at least that first day to see what another human being looks like in the workplace, after a few weeks of lockdown. But I think the reality is, I think David said it earlier as well, is people will look at how they are structured. It's very different based on all the different industry sectors, but people will look at how much real estate they have. They'll look at the offices that have sat unoccupied for 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, however long this and they'll think about the cost that has to their organisation in terms of how many desks do we need to sustain the people? If we were actually able to still survive and service our customers in a good way, I think there's a lot of positives to come from that. Is actually to empower a lot of the individuals that have been for years saying, I want to work from home and be able to pick my child up from school and do all the things that they aren't able to if they have to travel an hour to work every day. I think for me, they're the things that people will now have, as David said, no excuse to say it doesn't work, because it will do. I think the thing I'd want to see taken forward is just the flexibility. You can't always work from home. I can't always work from home. I want to go and see people. I think it's a really important part of my role. But actually, I've proved to myself, as someone that probably went to the office 4 or 5 times a week, 3 or 4 times a week, that actually I'm pretty productive from home, even though I thought there would be more distractions than I've found. And I think everyone will start to see that. So flexibility is key as sales leaders, whether it's ISR, whether it's, a junior rep, seasoned rep working for your business that's asking for more flexibility. As long as their numbers are where they need to be, we give it.
Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of a really fantastic hour. Thank you so much for everyone who joined, for fantastic questions, good comments in the chat. Absolute top thanks to Chris and Dave for their insight and just sharing their experience. I hope that this time has been of value to you, and thank you again to Sales Hacker for having CSO UK as part of this webinar. We wish you a wonderful day or evening, and stay well.